Dr. Hale Forrester. I'm so excited to introduce Hale. I've known Hale for just over a decade. Hale spent nearly 15 years applying behavioral science to support decarbonization. She started Action Research. She got her PhD at Columbia. She worked at Sea Change, the Consortium for Energy Efficiency, and she now sits as the Director of Behavioral Science at Limetree. She's been applying behavioral science to support decarbonization, health, and technology adoption for all this time. She has a PhD in judgment and decision-making from Columbia University and is past president of the Society for Environment, Population, and Conservation Psychology, otherwise known as APA's Division 34. Hale's favorite karaoke number, just in case you were wondering, is Journey's Don't Stop Believin', and you better believe Hale's going to give a great talk. Take it away.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. I am so excited to put on my academic and researcher hat today and give you a really high-level view of the state of behavioral science research on heat pump adoption. And you're going to be hearing more detail on a lot of these topics from Ellen and Kristen. So we know that we need to move much faster to increase the speed of heat pump adoption to meet our climate goals. But why is this a behavioral science problem? So behavior is everything. Behavior is turning off the lights and purchasing a heat pump, right? And behavioral science is the study of why we do what we do. You may call this interdisciplinary social science, and behavior science is really bringing this ability to understand what we are doing to the problem. So the backbone of behavioral science is this idea that our cognition is a finite resource. We live in an age of information overload, and we cannot process it all. And as a result, we have developed cognitive shortcuts to help us get through to help us process this. And one of the great illustration of cognitive shortcuts and kind of an illustrative concept is dual process theory. If you have read Thinking Fast and Slow or another behavioral economics book, you're going to recognize a lot of these. But basically, our brains, we make decisions in kind of two qualitatively different ways. System one is the Captain Kirk of our decision making: fast, intuitive, associative, kind of those routine decisions and shortcuts. You may not even know you made a decision. And our Spock is the effortful, slow, analytic decisions, when things like adopting a heat pump is going to be in Spock mode. But Spock takes a lot of cognitive power, and we are very miserly about when we activate Spock. So, but our Captain Kirk decisions are these cognitive shortcuts that influence our decisions in predictable ways that lead to all of these heuristics and biases that you've probably seen a list of in a book or article. We are very loss averse, we have present bias, we have limited attention, and all of these cognitive shortcuts lead to these predictable ways that we think about decisions that are challenging for adopting heat pump in ways that I will explain. So a concrete example of this is thinking about limited attention. So there was a Harvard researcher who created two versions of an email, a short version and a long version, and sent them out to school board members, asking them to fill out a survey. And so if you think about Spock or System 2, Spock probably prefers the longer email. More information allows Spock to get a better sense of why it's really important, and Spock is more likely to respond, getting more information. But our Kirks, they prefer the shorter email because it is easier. You can read it quickly and just go through and do that survey. And sure enough, the researchers found that cutting word count by 60% increased response rate by 80%. So that's an example of we are not fully rational. Our System 2 is really often overwhelmed by our System 1 beliefs. And this is the case for heat pump adoption when we are seeing information about this and making decisions. So I'm a cognitive psychologist, but when we think about our decisions are really a function of many influences. Heat pump adoption behavior, which we're talking about today, it's a function of that decision context and the information we see. So context of us, ourselves as customers, and our demographics and attitudes. It's a function of the people who we talk to, those middle actors, contractors, installers, other people who influence our decision. And our social context, our friends and neighbors, what they're doing. And finally, that at that bedrock, that policy context, what are the forces and influences that are can tell us what we do. And these are all layers of behavioral science insights, and behavioral science can look at each of these as well as how they fit together. And this is really what behavioral science is bringing to the party of why we decided to adopt heat pumps and how we're going to influence that. The other thing that behavioral science is really good at is behavioral frameworks. Setting aside, taking apart a heat pump adoption, which is really, we can call it a decision, but it's a complex series of actions and behaviors, and thinking about what are the components of those. So probably the most famous behavioral framework that I'm going to talk about today, which is the diffusion of innovation theory. You've probably seen this curve. This is the social process by which an innovation spreads throughout a population. We know that the first people to adopt heat pumps, these innovators, are really kind of different and have different needs and wants in their technology than the early adopters, the early majority, and the laggards. And this can explain how technology diffuses across the population. There is also a second part of this diffusion of innovation theory, which is about the personal process by which individuals decide to adopt an innovation, the innovation process here. And so this is, if I'm going to adopt an innovation, I have to have knowledge of it, I have to become aware of it. I have to persuasion, I have to decide it's important decision. I have to decide I want to implement it now. And then implementation, I actually have to do it. I have to get someone to install this for me. And confirmation, I live with it and get feedback on how that went. So I am going to walk you through the state of behavioral science research on heat pump adoption using this framework as our orienting process. So what have we learned so far in the state of social science research? And this is going to bias a little towards academic affiliated research, but also include a lot of those white papers and research studies that have certainly been incorporated by today. This is going to be a bird's eye view, and I'll use examples at each phase of that diffusion of innovation process. A lot of this section draws on a report by the Sea Change Institute, who did a systematic lit review that was presented recently and is forthcoming. So what do we know about the knowledge stage? We know a lot from social science about the best way to increase awareness. Lack of knowledge continues to be a big barrier in heat pump adoption. People are just not aware that this is a thing that exists or is important. And we know a lot about how to address that, how to effectively reach customers, send messages that capture attention or send at the right time, engaging audiences. We know that really effective ways to do that are via trusted messengers like peer ambassadors, local tradespeople, and also through community action. These have been effective in the past. When we talk about persuasion, we also know a lot in this space. There's been a lot of research on the persuasion around heat pump adoption. And we know that these heuristics and biases can really strike at any phase, but they've been particularly well studied when we think about trying to persuade people that this is important. For example, confirmation bias. We tend to pay attention to information that confirms our existing beliefs and ignore information that is not consistent with our prior beliefs. So that makes it really hard to change someone's mind. We're also really present biased. We value immediate concrete gratification and tend to strongly discount long-term benefits, which is a real challenge for heat pump adoption because the costs accrue immediately, as we all know, and the benefits accrue over time. So we're really going to undervalue those benefits. Those are two examples. There are more. But what are the implications for these biases? We know a fair amount about how to overcome these biases. Electrification technologies have to be seen as providing a better value or service than what they're replacing. And there are concerns about these products that need to be overcome. 65% of buyers cite better home heating as a reason for wanting gas heating still. And cold weather performance, heat loss, we know that these continue to be issues that we have to mindfully overcome those misperceptions. There's been quite a bit of research into the motivations around heat pump adoption, and Financial benefits matter, but climate health and comfort are also critical. I think when you talk about motivations, there's a distinction between persuading someone is that there's something they think is actually incorrect versus activating goals and telling someone that adopting heat pump is actually a good way to accomplish their underlying climate or comfort goals. But in either case, really understanding and talking to customers about what they care about and drawing those connections is really important. A really very important way to do all of these things from the literature is peer influence and social proof. Be mindful of who is telling you this and kind of show those peer testimonials and convey, widespread adoption where it's the case with trusted statistics. The decision phase of heat pump adoption is really about going from, I think this is important, to I'm going to do this. And we know actually less about this phase because a lot of social science research is on self-reported interest about these topics. But what we do know that electrification adoption lags willingness to adopt by as much as 40% or even more. Cost is often a barrier, but there are other really important factors here that we need to overcome, like energy literacy. People are, we just don't have a good sense of how much different technologies use. We're pretty impact insensitive about the magnitude and the extent to which heat pumps contribute to our usage. We don't have a good sense of how our energy system works and why it contributes to climate change. Issues like blackouts are certainly a problem too, and people with higher energy literacy may have more concerns about electrification. There is a lot of friction in this process. And by friction, I just mean those forces that prevent you from doing what you want to do. There's a lot of uncertainty and complexity. What system should you adopt? Should this be hybrid or a full transition? And the scheduling and all of the details really can get in the way from us saying this would be interesting to I can actually want to do this. Trust is a big issue. Do you really trust the persuasive information that you're getting? And that also leads us to our middle actors, which is the academics speak for contractors and installers and even home improvement stores, all of those people who are the experts who are going to help us. We have to trust them. And 80% of heating and cooling installations are emergency replacements. So those middle actors may be really in charge of this throughout the whole phase. They may be our primary source of information throughout this whole process. So they're incredibly critical. We'll be talking a lot about them. When we talked about implementation, again, friction plays a huge role here, and we know that from the research we've done, right? Technical and logistical challenges are a huge barrier here, which you all are very well aware of. Panel upgrades, permitting requirements, the availability of technology and qualified labor. Can you get this in the time frame you need? And is there someone who knows how to install it? And again, when we talk about contractors are really key in supporting this for the customer. And finally, the confirmation phase. We know there's a feedback loop with customer word of mouth, but customer experience and whether this is properly installed and they know how to operate it correctly is really going to determine the sign and magnitude of that feedback loop. Is this a positive loop where they become drivers of adoption, or is this a negative feedback loop where they are telling their friends their resistance? Again, that is a high-level overview of the state of the field. We could talk for hours more about what we know, but Kristen and Ellen are going to talk more about each of these. I just wanted to present a few initial recommendations for leveraging behavioral science to scale adoption based on what we know right now. And I will say a lot of these are well integrated, so I wanted to highlight a few that I think bear particular emphasis in my experience that we can continue to really incorporate into programs. So the first one is really ongoing leveraging those social norms, focusing really intentionally on how you are communicating those benefits over time and how you're making that possible and overcoming misinformation using those, again, and further engaging trusted messengers and middle actors in this process. Absolutely critical. I know this is task that everyone is dealing with, but being intentional there is going to have a lot of gains. Finally, thinking about friction for the customer and middle actor. I think from a social science perspective, we sometimes focus a lot on motivation, but that friction piece can be really important in helping convert people from interested to actually implementing, and thinking about that both for the customer and the middle actor are really critical. I also have from the literature, I think 3 program development process recommendations that I would love to see us continue to implement more. The first one is employing some kind of behavioral design process, whether that is a really well-developed logic model or using design thinking or incorporating journey maps, and use a behavioral scientist and really have a strong program theory for what you are going to do to help you, and design that program based on that theory for continuous learning. How can we learn not from the whole program, but from each of the components and how they're working together and who they're working for to really continue to iterate? And Ellen is going to have more to say about that shortly. The last recommendation is just why we're all here. Our industry is very siloed and it can be difficult to get best practices and learn from people. So continuing to really elevate how we can learn from and share those best practices will help us transform the market more rapidly. Thank you so much. If you want to get in touch, that's my email. And really big acknowledgement to the authors of the Sea Change Institute paper, that lit review. I encourage you to check this out when it gets published.
Thank you so much, Hale. We have time if we have one quick question for Hale before we move on. I want to thank Reuven and one other person. I think both put in, there was a This American Life about heat pumps that I could have listened to on my road trip and didn't. If anyone's not on the chat, there's stuff going on in there. Feel free to hop in the conversation. Any questions for Hale before we move on? Just pop back to the confirmation slide real quick. I think Rose wants a screenshot. And while we do that,
my screen picked this particular moment to freeze. Hold on.
We have a lot of expertise. Thanks to everyone who's chiming into the conversation. And we will, and Rose, we will be sharing the slides as well. But there we go. All right. And while we do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our next speaker. Just a reminder, if you do have questions for the speakers, go ahead and pop them in. You can do it anytime during their talk. I'm going to keep an eye on them and do Q&A after. And then, like I said, after all 3 are done, we'll spend a few minutes together before we pop into our small groups. The last slide with the contact. Hale, do you want to go ahead and type in your email, and I'll go ahead and type in mine for the lit review slides. And I'm going to turn it over to Ellen next. Dr. Ellen Steiner is Vice President at Opinion Dynamics. Ellen has more than 28 years of experience in research and evaluation, with 16 specifically committed to energy research. That's right. She's been doing this work since she was 10 years old. It's amazing. She has researched heat pumps dating back to 2011. She currently has the honor of leading the evaluation of California's Building Initiative for Low Emissions Development. That's a lot, but you can remember it by BUILD, the BUILD program, and the Technology Equipment for Clean Heating Tech Initiative. Gosh, we love acronyms in our space, don't we? Yeah. 2 of the largest decarbonization pilots in the country, which she'll be talking about. When Ellen is not working, she's keeping up with the antics of her 2 sons, collecting vintage Christmas decor, perfect timing, it is the holiday season, and scrapbooking. And I think it's really important when we're talking about behavioral approaches to go from Hale talking about theory to then also talking about methods. I think behavioral science is a combination, right, of like what we learn in theory and how we measure. So Ellen's going to get a little more into the technical side of programs and methods. So take it away, Ellen.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here again. Thank you to Beck for organizing this webinar on a very important topic. I'm always thrilled to talk about one of my favorite topics, which of course is heat pumps. I was going to wear I love my heat pump pin, but I didn't think it would show up very well on screen. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about Opinion Dynamics' whole independent systems evaluation approach, which again is based on developmental evaluation and rooted really in behavioral science. Then I'm going to dive into detail about specific heat pump water heater barriers and mitigation strategies from kind of combination of research studies we have conducted over the past 6 years. Okay. So again, it was back in 2020, I was sitting there, the pandemic had just started. I was thinking about, boy, things are getting complex. I always laugh when I mentor or manage different staff. I always feel like there's this kind of growth curve that people like by year 4, they start saying they're experts. And I always laugh because then about between year 5 and 6, they realize they're not experts. There's so much going on. There's so much intersections of systems and changes that we need to be aware of. So I was sitting there really thinking about, again, what I do, which is largely market research and evaluation. I was thinking about, climate change, the pandemic recovery, the focus on diversity issues finally. And I really came to the conclusion that traditional evaluation frameworks were not built for the complexity of the current clean energy and emerging energy economy. So this set me off on this path to develop this new framework that we refer to kind of affectionately as WISE. And really the goal here is to walk alongside a program and provide valuable insights for innovative program design and market development. Now, again, thinking historically, traditional evaluation frameworks have really focused on that evaluation is something you do to an intervention or a program. It's not something that you necessarily walk alongside, be that behavioral science voice in developing the logic models and the theories of change that Hale mentioned. And so again, thinking about that differently, I think those evaluation frameworks worked great. And I think there's so much that we can draw forward. But again, I think today the actual reality of really delivering or implementing intervention is often very messy. We start out with these program plans, and I mean, hopefully they're changing as the program develops, right? Like, again, we should be learning as we move through these interventions to then continuously send back improvements to the program theory and, of course, the developmental intervention that happened since then. Again, information collected on programs can often be contradictory these days if we haven't defined metrics and unit of analyses and the level of inquiry correctly. And again, I think we need to take these lessons learned and best practice from more the summative evaluation paradigm and really embed them in developmental or embedded evaluation approaches such as WISE, taking the best features from both theoretical constructs. I want to advance slides. So WISE utilizes a combination of traditional process, impact, and market studies, but it really takes this proactive approach to evaluation by generating insights really from the very beginning instead of waiting until the end. This allows for those immediate feedback loops, optimization of outcomes throughout the implementation process. And again, given the climate crisis, we don't have the luxury, right, to do an evaluation at the end of our program or a program cycle, wait 2 years before you get the results. We need to know things now. We need to be able to act quickly to be able to drive heat pump adoption. So given that emerging heat pump markets and the novel program strategies we see at play in decarbonization programs, I think the principles of WISE enable streamlined program optimization kind of in this complex and changing landscape. So you can kind of see from the principles on the slide, Utopia is, again, an acronym we came up with because, this field has to have lots of acronyms. These principles really kind of embrace this idea of timely utilization-focused research while understanding the large and complex ecosystem in which these programs are acting. It really acknowledges the continued need for independent third-party evaluation. And again, although the landscape of interventions is more complex today, we have interventions coming from federal, regional, and local entities, as well related to energy efficiency, but also demand response, DERs, and decarbonization programs. And so I believe that role of a third-party independent evaluator is even more essential so that we can both get those program outcomes as quickly as possible, and also prevent waste, fraud, and abuse of taxpayer and ratepayer funds. So we have found that organizing evaluation activities within the 4 pillars of WISE has proven effective and really reflects, again, that interconnection that, changes likely have ripple effects, and we want to be able to measure those. This could be a new policy change that comes down from a commission. It could be the addition of a new program like a HERA coming down from the federal government, or it could be a new technology entrant such as a 120-volt heat pump water heater. So again, you can see these pillars focus not only on program performance, but really try to identify and track market transformation indicators over time, along with monitoring the evaluation of technologies, as well as rapidly changing policy and regulatory landscapes. And again, this is not an evaluation framework that works for all programs by any means. These are a market transformation evaluation approach that really looks at human behavior and tries to understand how that human behavior should drive program theory and program implementation. So I'm going to take you just through a very brief case study of WISE in action. As Beth kind of shared, I do feel like I have this deep honor of leading the evaluations in California of 2 of the largest heat pump pilots in the program. The TECH program, which stands for Technology and Equipment for Clean Heating, is a large retrofit heat pump program that was really designed to help advance heat pumps and specifically achieve carbon neutrality in the state of California. Again, they get to utilize really a comprehensive set of strategies, including market incentives, supply chain engagement, workforce development, consumer education, and quick start grants to drive market transformation. On the flip side, we have the BUILD program, which stands for Building Initiative for Low Emissions Development. This is a large program focused on low income new construction. And it is, again, an intervention that in this program envelops kind of market and outreach, technical assistance, and again, market incentives to really drive low income developers to build all electric new construction with no gas hookups. I want to take you through, because again, I think both as Hale and Beth have talked about, behavioral science needs to go along with the program design, the implementation, and the evaluation. And I wanted to talk through a couple of research examples. So I know supply chain mapping is one thing that we have done a fair amount of work with. Sorry about that. And it's really a method to really track changes in the market based on, again, the diffusion of innovation model that Hale mentioned in her talk. With this, we focus both on the customer side as well as the installer side, because both of those groups are key stakeholders in this heat pump evolution. And again, you'll see, again, looking at, we talk with 69 market actors to develop the supply chain map from the contractor perspective to really be able to reflect the different shifts in the supply chain from different perspectives. Second, we have the heat pump customer experience survey. And this was really a study that we designed to really answer the question, are we incenting another CFL? We really wanted to understand how customers who had lived with their heat pump between 6 months and a year experience their heat pump. What can we learn from that? What can we learn from the value propositions that we sold them a heat pump with, and how they actually experienced those value propositions? We uncovered that although it was a minority of cases, the common heat pump water heater issues reported were noise and vibration. But other survey customers, although small, reported plumbing issues, leaks from pipes, and condensate issues. And so from that, we were able to take that information and feed it back into the training for the contractors so they understood what some of the mechanisms were to address both noise and vibration, be it by vibration insulation kits, foam kits from manufacturers, or replacing fans has been a common solution. Next, we have the heat pump cost study. This is the study I'm probably the most excited about and really gets to build on behavioral science. Now, like a lot of researchers, I've done cost studies. I've tried to develop these really effective surveys. I've tried to develop descriptions of homes in a way that hopefully get us apples to apples. We just have always felt like, this is not how contractors think. I'm asking them to think about pricing in a way that generally my experience working with contractors doesn't resonate with. So this study was born. We borrowed 30 different homes that had natural gas equipment in California. We had researchers pose as the homeowner, and we got to both observe the kitchen table conversation. We found out what do contractors ask? Who brings up the heat pump first? What benefits or drawbacks? What's the sentiment the contractors are talking about when they actually speak about heat pumps? And then on top of it, we were able to collect real life quotes on like-for-like replacements. We had the heat pump costs. The tech program was actually tracking that, but we all kind of forgot to think about, well, if, surprisingly enough, we saw heat pump costs go up. But again, those drivers of some of that increase had to do with material pricing, like copper wiring. So that should have affected both heat pumps as well as traditional HVAC or heat pump water heaters. But we didn't have that ability to track that piece. And so this is kind of an exciting study that we're just kind of working through. We have tons of data now and working on the report for. And then finally, I wanted to represent kind of a policy watch perspective. And again, from a policy pillar, we are doing a cost effectiveness study, which is much more of a paper pencil theoretical exercise, but really kind of looking at the current California cost effectiveness frameworks that typically have been used for energy efficiency programs, and really looking at what needs to change there. What can we keep and what do we need to change to address electrification programs moving forward? So now I'm going to really switch places, and I'm going to talk specifically about a number of heat pump water heater barriers that we've seen and some of the mitigation strategies that we found to be helpful. So first of all, again, probably not going to surprise anybody. Installers want the job done quickly and to avoid customer callbacks. So again, heat pump water heater adoption, especially in California, is a relatively recent and growing phenomenon. Most installers report beginning to install heat pump water heaters in the last several years, with 52% reporting starting installations in 2019 or later, 53% only beginning to install heat pump water heaters last year. And of those not currently installing heat pump water heaters, we did also find that 32% plan to do so in the next year. Now, there are misconceptions in level 1 and level 2 thinking about heat pump water heater efficiency, especially with contractors. We conducted a study to complete a job task analysis to identify the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to install a heat pump water heater in a way that maximizes efficiency and greenhouse gas reduction. Now, this is the kind of adult gold standard of how to do a job task analysis. And it's an intensive kind of 2-day in-person process. And we were very surprised to really experience significant resistance to the idea that a heat pump water heater could be more efficient than a tankless water heater. And I thought it was a particularly good example of this idea that this isn't just educating somebody. These were deep held beliefs, and that we needed to work with contractors to understand how to undo those beliefs, focusing on level 1 and level 2 processes, so that we could really begin to drive that, wait a second, there actually is a more efficient alternative. So again, I think this was an example of confirmation bias that Hale also mentioned, that again, really had a strong hold on installers. Interesting enough, again, one mitigation process has to be that we have found now multiple times in multiple studies, including different people, that we see that contractors having experience with heat pump water heaters is essential for them to move on this behavioral track to understanding why heat pump adoption is so important. For example, we just recently did a study on the water heater market in general, and we found people that had no experience installing heat pump water heaters ranked gas storage tank systems as the most profitable type of water heater. As compared to those with experience, all of a sudden the whole ranking changed and heat pump water heaters became the most profitable. So again, that need to really get people into the door and have the experience is essential. So again, along with that, training and education really can improve competency and speed, making installers more likely to recommend heat pump water heaters. Topics that people have brought up of how it works, installation requirements, electrical considerations, efficiencies, the modes, warranty, and incentives. We've also found that training and education that is done partnered with distributors, since that is a common means to get training in these trades, can be very effective. And also developing peer networks. So heat pump installers that have experience and those with less experience or no experience can talk peer to peer has been an incredibly valuable program strategy. Next, not surprising, homeowners are price sensitive and familiarity remains low. So again, what do I mean by that? I'm talking about not awareness of there's something called a heat pump water heater, but really going into that, like, okay, are you familiar enough with how a heat pump works and understand at least at a high level what the benefits might be? So again, in 2023, we did a survey of California homeowners, and we found that 39% were aware of heat pump water heaters, which actually was a 7% increase from the survey we conducted the year before. But it was also notably much lower than the HVAC heat pump side, which was 58%. Again, we found that respondents' largest concerns with purchasing heat pump water heater, and again, I think Hale mentioned some of these, were the associated costs and the possibility of additional home upgrade requirements. And then respondents most commonly identified the possibility of an electric mechanical upgrade as another concern, as well as increased utility bills. Now, we've done work with heat pump distributors across the country. And again, I don't ever find much resistance to stocking heat pump water heaters if there is contractor interest in purchasing the equipment. So again, space is a consideration that comes up over and over again as a challenge. So again, distributors are going to prioritize stocking equipment that sells quickly. Excuse me. Programs really should strengthen relationships with distributors to incentivize stocking and selling more heat pump water heaters. We have found, excuse me, that starting with a small focus group of distributors first and then expanding has been a particularly good strategy. And that it's not a one and done proposition, that those regular interactions with distributors are important. And then offering a tiered bonus strategy with higher incentives for selling more units has also been particularly effective. And finally, I went to the wrong one. Multifamily property owners want a space saving option. So, when it comes to product selection, multifamily building owners are generally driven by the bottom line more than anything else. They want to maximize the number of units they can sell or rent, but while minimizing the space taken up by mechanical equipment, whether in unit or elsewhere in the building. To get around these challenges, heat pump water heaters are sometimes placed in corridors or balconies outside to avoid taking up that living space in the unit. The space constraint seems to be a larger challenge in the affordable housing sector as opposed to the market rate sector, although that's a new phenomenon we've kind of uncovered and are still kind of researching. Now, heat pump water heaters recovery rate is slower than gas-fired equipment, so designers tend to include large storage tanks, which can take up premium space in a new construction building. Also, because gas-fired boilers can be placed almost anywhere in the building, and there's more restriction on where heat pump water heaters can live due to the need for ambient air circulation. That can be also a limitation that people talk about. Sometimes those compressors or tanks often can go up on the roof to get that ambient air. But again, of course, having extra weight on the roof means a structural engineer has to design buildings to support that weight, which translates into extra steel and cost for the developer, or just takes up valuable roof space for other types of equipment like solar. We have found that technical systems is especially pivotal to grow adoption of heat pumps in that market family sector. And again, we have found that technical systems can really drive greater uptake. But again, I think the challenge that existed around technical systems prior, not even related to heat pumps, but just new construction from an energy efficiency perspective, has been, again, how do we get involved early enough in the design process? And so that does still remain a challenge in decarbonization sectors as well.
Ellen, we're going to need your last comments.
That's my last
Really
sentence.
save some
Yes,
room
good. I was
for our
just
last
going to say
speaker.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you so much.
I was just summing it all up. Please do not hesitate to reach out with questions or request reports, either in the chat or with my email.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We unfortunately don't have any time for questions. We need to get to our last speaker, who I'm so excited to introduce, Kristen Heinemeyer. Kristen and I were hanging out in the beautiful Asilomar Conference Center at Summer Study this year, and she was talking about the research she'd been doing on contractors, and I knew that I wanted her to round out our session today. So Kristen is an engineering manager with Frontier Energy in Davis, California. She has almost 40 years of experience in buildings energy research. Kristen has applied behavioral and HVAC technology research and stakeholder engagement to energy efficiency technologies, programs, policies, and best practices. She's the technical manager of a $30 million market transformation program across California to get the most out of residents, HVAC providers, and the principal investigator of a pilot workforce development program in a growing but disadvantaged region of Southern California. Kristen has a PhD in building science and is a licensed mechanical engineer. She's been honored as an ASHRAE Fellow and a recipient of ASHRAE's Distinguished Service Award. Fun fact, Kristen once opened a bottle of champagne with a saber in Fontainebleau and has once seen a tiger in the wild. Kristen is going to talk to us about contractor considerations. So Kristen, take it away.
All right, thanks. Can you see my screen and hear me okay? All right, good.
Yep, thanks for asking. We can.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about research that I've done over some of those 40 years into the middle actors that Hale mentioned, contractors. I think we all recognize that it's a little much to expect that homeowners are aware of or familiar with heat pumps and all the considerations. They're not going to necessarily ask for it. They may not even be open to hearing about it, but so it's really the contractors that are the tip of the spear on getting this stuff out there. And but they do have their own barriers and behavioral considerations that we really need to understand. It's not merely a business decision, but there's a lot of stuff, a lot of motivations, limitations, incentives, and so forth that influence what contractors do. And I do want to point out that I should have said contractors and technicians. I tend to kind of use those terms interchangeably, but they're very, very distinct populations. Make sure that we're all on the same page. Contractor is the boss and technicians are the laborers. So it's kind of a management labor relationship. And the technicians are the ones in the field with the customers for the most part, but it's the contractor who kind of sets the terms of that interaction. They tell the technicians what to do. They influence what kind of training the technicians get. They set the standards for what it is they're supposed to do in the field. So both of them have a lot of influence and their very own set of behavior. So I'm going to be talking about a series of little nuggets from some research that I've done over the years. I don't have time, obviously, to delve in on any one of them, but I'll focus on in the end on what they kind of mean for the situation of heat pump adoption. First one is a survey that I did of contractors and technicians back in 2014, 2015. This was a survey done for another purpose, but I decided to throw in some questions about attitudes about climate change. And you'll see up in the corner that is a relatively small survey, so I'm not going to put too much faith on it. But I was really surprised at the answers that I got, even back in 2015. I expected both contractors and technicians to say like, nope, I don't believe in climate change. You know, they tend to be a somewhat conservative population. Conservatives are more likely than liberals to not believe in climate change. So I really thought I would see like, nope, it's not happening. But you can see that there was, you know, they did agree with most of these statements. It's happening. It's a serious problem. It's caused by humans and so forth. The one point that I wanted to raise was this one in the middle. Customers are receptive to climate change talk. And that one really surprised me because I think the sense is like, yeah, I believe it. I think it's important, but ooh, I'm not going to talk to my customers about it because that's really going to turn them off. I don't want to do anything that turns them off. So I was surprised to see that 2/3 of the technicians said, yeah, my customers are receptive to talk about it. Also surprised that the contractors were much less likely to say that. So that, you know, again, it's not a very scientific sample, but it did seem kind of interesting to me that there's some difference. You know, the people that are actually out there in the field say, yeah, they're receptive to it, and their bosses said like, no, I don't think we better talk to them about it. So I think it raises some issues about, are they the tip of the spear? I think they could be. They may not be willing to stick their neck out and say like, oh, you should do this. It's going to save the world. But if you look at the bars on the right, I'm proud to help climate change. Both populations, over 80% said that. I think if we can kind of focus on that, and how do we encourage that attitude amongst contractors and technicians? Like, yeah, I'm doing a really good thing here. I'm sharing something really good with my customers, and I want them to know about it. So I think that's something that could have a real influence on what they do and what they recommend. The next study I wanted to share is something in 2016 that we did for the California community colleges, where we did a bunch of interviews and focus groups with HVAC instructors, contractors, recent graduates, some other folks on how do we get more students into the programs. And one thing that we looked at specifically is, who are the role models out there? And I don't know how many of you know this guy, but he's not necessarily the best role model out there. I don't think too many young high schoolers are like, yeah, I want to be that guy. But you know, maybe we need to be looking at other kinds of role models. This guy, Mike Rowe, in the upper right-hand corner, the dirty jobs Ford trucks guy. He's a real big supporter of the trades. So he's I think a great role model for this kind of job. Also in the lower right, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie Brazil. It's an awesome movie all about ducts and HVAC. The hero of the story, Robert De Niro, here is kind of a renegade HVAC guy. So I check it out. But you know, there are different kinds of role models that we could be putting out there. And I think these are some quotes which I thought really summed up a lot of things. And just this last one that says, best technicians are highly intelligent underachievers. Their parents, teachers, authority look at these people as destined to fail. That's really a sense that this is not a very good job. It's a pretty low prestige, low sophistication job. Most people kind of fail into it. They don't aspire to doing it. And given that we need these people to be doing good work, we need more people and we need them to be doing better work. I think we really need to address this issue about why are the trades so low prestige, and how can we really affect that? The next project I want to talk about is something that's ongoing right now. It's a DOE-funded pilot study to look at, here's another great acronym, Career Pathways to Advance the Trades and HVAC Services, PATHS. It's looking at how do we, it's a pilot study in the Inland Empire region of Southern California, a fairly impoverished region, low or high unemployment, a lot of non-English speakers, you know, underemployment, unemployment. And at the same time, there's a lot of growth, a lot of building. People are moving from the higher rent districts of Los Angeles, moving out east where it's a little bit more affordable. And it's also hot. It's, you know, out in the desert. So it's a perfect storm of the need for great workers. And there's a population there that could be great workers, but they don't have the education that they need. And so it's a great opportunity to promote education. And it's focused on this sort of pathway from, in your career, looking not just at training in one particular area, but how can we look at someone's career path through their entire career? And started with recruitment, and I'm going to focus on that part of it. We're doing a social media campaign, and I wanted to talk about this here because I really want to encourage people to share, comment. I don't even know all the words to use for social media. I'm not the world's expert. But we do have a social media campaign where we've got a bunch of really great videos, testimonials from actual students on how they got into it, what led to it. We've got some paid actors in English and in Spanish. We've got women, we've got veterans, career changers, a cop that was laid off and went into HVAC. So a bunch of really great videos that we're pretty excited about. They're all on our YouTube channel, but if you go to any of our social media, you'll hopefully be able to see some of that stuff. So I don't even know what all these stats mean, but we've had like 500 followers each on Instagram and Facebook, over 112,000 views of our videos, and a lot of folks coming to our landing page. So pretty exciting way to tell people about this. It's a low status position, so we need to tell people, hey, this is not low status. This is a great career. You can be well paid. It's better than working at Amazon. You got a career trajectory ahead of you. So that's this study. One that we did this along with Ellen, you'll recognize this. Back in 2012, we did a covert observation of some contractors or technicians. Actually, we invited them to come to a house and we said, I don't know, look at our system. We think maybe something's wrong. And we had a sociologist. You see this woman here, Claudia Barriga, worked for us, and she's a behavioral scientist, and she was playing the housewife saying, oh, why are you doing that? I don't really understand. So it was kind of a neat study. And what you'll see is that any blank space here is where they didn't do something we thought they should do. The open circles where they at least tried but didn't quite hit the mark. The filled-in circles are they did it correctly. You can see a lot of blanks there, and it was really astonishing how poor the quality was. But we interviewed them afterwards, and we found that they were actually on the ball. They had a lot of training. They knew what they were doing. They understood how to do all this. But their perception was that they weren't expected to. The customers didn't want them to do it. Their bosses didn't want them to spend any time they didn't have to. So it definitely seemed like a question of expectations, not of abilities. I'll talk about that some more in just a minute. And the final one is that $30 million California statewide market transformation program, where we're providing incentives for contractors to do a little bit better job on the maintenance and installation. And you'll see in this table of incentives how much we give. Along the left-hand side, we give incentives for doing a bid, which is something contractors normally don't get paid anything for. So why would they spend any extra time? But there's a lot of stuff happening then that really should be happening. And installation, maintenance setup, kind of commissioning and maintenance calls. And then we have different tiers. The tier 1 is building confidence, people who really have no experience with quality HVAC services. Tier 2, advancing the average. It's kind of a diffusion of innovation sort of chart you could imagine. And then on the right, there's a bit of a kicker for contractors that routinely do good work. So what does all this mean? What are the findings and the gaps? The contractor technician survey, how can we encourage contractors and technicians to get out there and spread the word about climate change? I'm giving you a heat pump, which is a really important thing for a lot of reasons. How do they have that conversation? Are they empowered to have that conversation by their, as a technician empowered by their boss to have that conversation? What are the communication issues that come about there? Contractor interviews, there is a workforce shortage. It's a great career, but most people don't know about it and think it's dead end low status. What's forming these impressions, and how can they be influenced? The recruitment and training, we were really looking at HVAC basics. Before you even think about doing heat pumps, you got to know the basics. You have to know how to size them. You have to know how to charge them. You have to know how to do a measurement. You have to do duct tests. There's a lot of things that have nothing to do with heat pumps, but if you don't have those basics, you are not going to be able to do a good job on a heat pump. So what kind of training is needed to really make sure that they have those basics, both in early training, in trade school, but then later, if you've missed that in trade school, how can we encourage that in a more, late career training? Technician observation, I think that's one of the best things I've ever done. I just felt like we got so much out of that the skills that the technicians do have aren't valued by them. They like, oh yeah, I guess I know how to do this stuff, but nobody's telling me I need to do it. It must not be very good. It's not valued by their bosses or their customers. But if I did come away feeling that if customers and contractors expect those better services, the technicians can provide it. But how can we show that value to customers? It's not at all straightforward. How do customers know, oh, if I spend this extra money, I'm going to get something better? Oops. And then finally, the incentive program that we're running right now, customers won't pay more unless they get a more valuable service. And contractors won't provide a more valuable service unless customers pay for it. It's a chicken and egg thing. So can we use incentives to kind of kickstart that cycle? It's still kind of in progress now, finding out if that can do that. But I do think that something is needed to kickstart that cycle so that customers will get a better value and contractors will want to provide this. They'll make more money by providing it than by not. So with that, I am done. Take it away, Beth.
Thank you so much, Kristen. So right now we're just going to take a couple minutes. I'm going to ask a couple questions that came in the chat. We only have time for a few because I want to make sure that we do get out into our group discussion. But I'm going to start with one, and I'm just going to give these talks had a lot of overlapping themes. So I'm just going to give throw out some questions to any speaker who wants to address them. The first was, and this one was bumped up by a couple other people. Does the interaction of building envelope with heat pump implementation impact perception and behavior for implementing heat pump projects? Do any of our speakers want to quickly take that on?
Well, I think my off-the-cuff response would be, it would make sense that could be, I have never tested that, but I think it makes sense that it could, because I think you would see that indoor air comfort be so much stronger if you address the building envelope issues along with the addition of the heat pump.
Yeah, I love that, Ellen. It really depends on, yes, it really depends on the customer journey as well. Because if you have a failing heating and cooling system that you just need to replace now, you may not be bundling that with insulation may really decrease your likelihood to pursue this because it just feels even more complicated. So I think there's a lot of interactions to consider there about who that is right for, but certainly can increase comfort depending on when you're thinking about it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Again, I think an emergency replacements, it wouldn't probably work if you're dealing with a situation where you may have just a slight early retirement, or the system's having problems. You may be able to get away with a little bit more there.
I just wanted to say that when I replaced my system with the heat pump, I had the insulation removed from my attic and fresh insulation put in, and that happened on 2 different days. So the first night I was really cold and I was like, oh man, isn't insulation great? Isn't a heat pump great? I was like, oh, this is really great. And that one night of discomfort kind of helped a lot.
Interesting.
Awesome. Next question. Someone asked around energy literacy. What do you see are the biggest gaps in energy literacy? For example, is it understanding energy units, sources, costs? Is there research on effective energy literacy? And I would just add in, what do you think is the relationship between how important is energy literacy to the installation of heat pumps? How much should we be focusing on that? And again, any of the speakers.
Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Just real quickly, I would have said at one point that I think life cycle costing is a literacy question that a lot of people don't understand, like why this is so expensive, but it's gonna pay back over time. So it might still be a good idea. I think with heat pumps, it's kind of interesting because you may not pay back over time, but you still should do it. So I mean, it's a very different story to tell.
Yeah, it brings up the question too of how much do we really need to educate and understand, right? What's the right level of energy literacy? How do we need people to understand how a heat pump works to adopt it? But that said, there has been some great research on energy literacy. Beth and Becky Ford have done some great research on energy cultures and how people think about it. We can probably pull up some citations for you. And part of that is, different elements of understanding. But when you put the onus on the customer to be really informed, you are making that a much higher burden for them rather than really trying to be mindful of that and work around it.
And I've done some research in energy literacy, and I think it particularly becomes salient when we start to talk about pairing heat pump programs with demand response. And again, I think we're going to see the need to continue to do that moving forward. And then all of a sudden, I think you get into some more complicated concepts that really are foundational to the customer decision making process. So that would be kind of where I would start to see that really come into play.
I think following on to what Hale said, I think that, yeah, they don't necessarily need to understand how a heat pump works, but I think it would be very, very helpful if they trusted their contractor. You have contractors, gave them good advice, didn't try to upsell them. If they portrayed themselves as, I really understand this, it's kind of sophisticated. And, I think, again, you can't necessarily expect them to make good decisions just because they understand it so well. They're going to have to throw themselves at the mercy of their contractor. Hopefully the contractor is worthy of that trust.
The information action fallacy is one of the biggest traps that we fall into from a behavioral science perspective. We just can't educate people into changing their behavior. We know it doesn't work.
Awesome. Well, at this point, I know we could keep asking. What I'm going to do is we're going to transition from the traditional speaker audience role, although we've been doing a good job of that already in the chat, into our discussion. Again, these webinars were sponsored to bring together a few key experts and the broader community. So we're going to invite anyone who wants to stay on and chime in. We're going to be breaking out into groups where you're going to be discussing and sharing two key things that we're writing up into a summary report for the Department of Energy. And we're looking into how we can share it broadly with the BECC community. But two key things. One, based on the existing research, based on what we know, what recommendations do we have for electrification and specifically heat pump water heater programs or heat pump programs, water or electricity, or heating and cooling. And then second, what don't we know? What additional research is needed? I've already seen some of both in the chat. So this is a good time. If you are not staying for that discussion, go ahead and drop off so we can make sure our groups, when we sort you out, are relatively equal. Somebody was asking for more journey mapping, maybe splitting out the planned journey map from the emergency journey map. I'm just going to throw out some of the questions that we didn't get to because maybe they'll come up in your groups, things that I think you can talk about. Social norms piece. What if the norms are contributing to carbon lock-in? Is it better to push loss from not having a heat pump or gain? Are the savings really there? Does energy literacy matter? Should we be focusing on energy literacy? Would a heat pump water heater be more profitable from a contractor perspective or a heat pump because of the additional electrical work needed? We have the 2029 federal minimum efficiency standards might be replacing residential electric resistance storage water heaters. That's a hard thing to say with heat pump water heaters. How will that information be conveyed? Can we leverage that the minimum standards are changing into our program promotion now? Journey mapping. Do we know how much households take energy savings into account? And how many people have experienced utility sticker shock when implementing heat pumps? And how do we make sure we're not pushing people into programs that aren't in their financial best interest? So those are just some things to think about. With that, I'm going to check. Andrea, are we ready to shoot the 8178 brave souls that are willing to engage in discussion with us into groups?
Yes.
All right. Thank you all for staying. So you're going to go into groups for the next 10 minutes. We're going to come back at 12:21 and share out what we found. So you've got 10 minutes to brainstorm as many great ideas as you can. Hop out and we'll see you in 10.
Thanks, Beth. I just wanted to say a huge thank you for everybody who's here to the end of the webinar, for everybody that came out to the BECC webinars over 2024. And this has just been a fantastic send-off and great grand finale. Mark on your calendars, November 2nd to 5th, 2025, because we will be back in person for the first time in 2 years. The BECC conference is reuniting. We're going to be discussing this topic and many other relevant topics. So I'm excited to see everyone in person, and stay tuned also for next year's webinar series, which of course will kick off the beginning of the year. And Beth, yeah, I can just see the excitement emanating. Thanks everybody. Feel free to reach out to your speakers or to myself at any time for more information, and we'll see you next year.